So we're going to go ahead and get started here. We're waiting on a couple more members to show up here, but we're going to go ahead and start working. We're going to start off with HB 2028, and Mike will give us the rundown on that.
Mike Heim with the Revisor Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a technical bill. It revives a statute that was sunsetted, and it puts back in place a law dealing with hunting, fishing, and charges and so on. And the explanation for this will come from the Department of Wildlife and Parks, but the bottom line is that this is a technical bill, and I think it's needed. So,
Committee, any questions for Mike? Seeing none, thank you. First up to talk about the bill, Representative Ken Corbett.
Good morning, everybody. This bill does two things. It takes away the sunset on the youth lifetime license, and it reinstates the senior lifetime license that expired last year, maybe just through the drop of a ball or whatever. But there's a lot of seniors between 65 and 75 that kind of count on buying this lifetime license to get them into a few more years of hunting for about $40. This changes no money on either bill. It just basically extends, takes the sunsets away. So if it happens to happen again, there'll be nobody caught just flat-footed. So any questions? I'll be glad to take them.
Thank you for that, Representative. So I just want to be clear on that. So actually the only two things this does is it actually extends the youth hunting lifetime license, which is currently in effect right now through like 35 or 34, 35 or something. Okay, 32. And it just kind of takes that off. And it extends it kind of indefinitely.
Right. So the youth license and the senior license will have no sunsets on them. So
okay, and yeah, same thing on the seniors. Yeah. It expired last year or 22, so we're just going to take that sunset off. Body, is there any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually got a couple of emails on this, and I thought, you know, this is pretty non-controversial. Do you expect any trouble on the floor with this?
If you like Santa Claus and good things like that, there should be no problem. This is pretty sweet.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Body, are there any more questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative. Next up to talk would be Representative Will Carpenter. Welcome back to committee.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, committee, good to be before you. I do support 2028. I support the importance of getting our youth involved in hunting and fishing. I think that's great. I will mention that taking the sunset off of the children's deal is also a significant cost to wildlife and parks. So that's a great thing, and I support that, but it is at cost when they're entirely fee-funded. So I understand there's an amendment floating around. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about, to take the children's license to 16. And while I support any kind of increase in youth participation in our hunting sports, when you have an agency that is entirely fee-funded and you're messing with the revenue source, then you have to be careful. And so I would say if that amendment gets on, that whatever the revenue source would be or whatever the cost would be to the agency, that we would backfill that with state general fund money. So again, we don't want to cut into the revenue too far. I support these others. The youth license is a significant, it was ended in 2032, and it goes on now forever, and that's a pretty expensive bill. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative. I just wanted to kind of come back on that later comment real quick. So what you're saying is that this bill here, because it only changes from 5 years and younger, and then it also addresses 6 and 7-year-olds. and you're saying there possibly be an amendment to take that up to 16, where you support this bill, but you probably would not support, without looking at the fiscal note, for going up to 16.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm not totally against that, but I think that we need to know the fiscal impact of the revenue loss to the department is all I'm saying about that. If we look at it next year and we get some fiscal notes on it about what it's going to cost the department, I could get on board with it, but at this point in time, I'm just urging caution.
Yep, 100% agree. Representative Clayton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Representative. I support this bill entirely. It's the same question that you have, at least as far as the fiscal impact is considered. And I think raising it to 16 is way too high. But I think that perhaps, at least offline, people can look at maybe even like potentially slightly increasing the fees. I'm talking by like 25 cents or something, to see how that might look. I am hesitant about taking money out of SGF because we just had a budget briefing before we came here, so I'm a little skeptical on that, but willing to work with anyone behind the scenes on something that could make this policy happen without hurting SGF. Thank you.
Was there a question in that?
No, just an indication to work with you.
Just wanted to make sure I didn't miss that question.
Representative Corbett?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Representative. The thing about these two licenses, especially the first one, Kansas has lost resident license sales for about probably the last 10 or 15 years. They've almost lost a generation. And what the youth license does, it gives you a buy-in to maybe get some kids online that may not otherwise have a chance. Normally, if someone buys it for them, they may be a mentor to them and get them fishing or hunting. But the other thing about the wildlife and parks that sometimes is forgotten, if any of you kind of remember farming, you've got to kind of put a crop in if you want to harvest. And for years and years, it seems like whether you're a landowner or you just like being here, I think wildlife and parks need just to kind of plant a little something if they want to increase their harvest. And I think this is a great start, and I ask for your support.
Any other questions for Representative Carpenter? Chair Carpenter, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee?
We did have some scheduling mix-ups when it came to scheduling because of our snow day, or when the Capitol was locked down Wednesday. So we had to ran into a few problems with calendar and getting everything printed and getting notices out. So I just want to extend this out. Is there somebody else in the audience that wanted to speak as a proponent to this bill that didn't get their testimony turned in time? Seeing none, we'll move on down the list. Opponents. I have Tanner with AFP. Is he oral or written? We are going to, oh, here he is. Welcome to committee.
I'm actually here in opposition to HB 2279.
Thank you, sir. Well, I told you we had some mix-ups in all this timing and stuff. So is there anybody else that would like to speak to this as a proponent, opponent, or neutral on this bill? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on this and move on to item number 2. Item number 2 is going to be HB 2028. And Mike, will you bring us up to speed on that one?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
We just did 2028.
Sorry. 2279, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is another bill dealing with wildlife and parks. Current law that is being amended here, if an economic impact statement required by a different statute or a revised economic impact statement and it indicates that more than $1 million or more in implementation and compliance costs are reasonably expected, then it requires the legislature basically to approve the rule and regulation. What this bill does would exempt rules and regulations adopted by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks.
Committee, any questions for Mike? Representative Corbett.
Mike, does this bill basically take rules and regs out of the act for anything that Wildlife and Parks request as regarding to an impact study?
That's my understanding.
Wow.
Any other questions?
Actually, I think I need to clarify that. I think they still have to prepare an economic impact statement, but they don't need legislative approval if they find that it's going to be more than $1 million. But I'll ask my colleague Kyle if I'm reading it correctly.
Thank you. I'd have to double check that provision. For the moment, I'll defer to conferees.
Representative Corbett.
What this bill does, the section of the bill requires that if you have an economic impact statement that is $1 million or more in implementation over a 4-year period, I believe, that it would require, 5-year period, excuse me, it would require legislative approval in order for that to go into effect. This bill exempts rules and regulations adopted by the Department of Wildlife and Parks from this provision of this statute.
Representative Corbett.
So, Mike, does that mean to you that anything over $1 million will just automatically not be affected by rules and regs? It'll just be passed through by the legislature?
It would not require legislative approval. You've got conferees, I think, that can shed more light on this.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike or somebody from ks.gov maybe, do we know how much an economic impact study costs, or how detailed or how much time that takes to get that done?
The law requires economic impact statements be prepared on rules and regulations and so on. It's prepared by the state agency that is proposing the rules and regulations. I don't know if there's ever been a study in terms of how much it costs the agency to prepare the economic impact statement.
A study for a study? Do you have a guess, anybody?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan Milholm, Legislative Research. I've staffed the JCAR committee for, I think, 8 or 9 years now. And since we've had these in place, I'm not aware of any study that's been presented to us as far as what it costs agencies. My understanding, based on what we've been presented with each of the rules and regs packets, is that it depends on the set that's being proposed. So that would indicate to the agency maybe with the topic of the rules and regs who they might contact. But I think they all have their own individual processes for making those determinations.
Representative Corbett.
Just following up with you on that, so if this was to pass and the only agency it affects is Wildlife and Parks, would it set a precedent for the other agencies to say what's good for them is good for us? I mean, would we be cracking the door for the rest of the agencies to override rules and regs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I could really speak to anything that might happen in the future on this, but I'll defer to the revisers, of course, as far as the legal effect of how this would go in.
Well, see, no more questions. Thank you, Mike. Unless you have something else to add to that. All right. First up, I have Chairman Will Carpenter.
Much committee, at my age, you don't get too many firsts, but this is the first time I'm going to testify on 3 bills before this committee ever, and probably, hopefully, the last. I did introduce this bill I stand in strong support of exempting the wildlife and parks from the $200,000 economic study over 5 years, totaling $1 million. I supported 2648 when it passed because I understand what we're talking about as far as the rules and regulations and bureaucrats actually making these things. I supported that, but I think wildlife is a little bit different than a permit times however many people buy that permit. For instance, Wildlife and Parks the commission was working a non-resident waterfowl bill, and they'd been working it for 2 years. And before it could go into effect, 2648 came into effect. They had to do a $200,000 an economic impact study. Think about trying to do an economic impact study on the effects of non-resident waterfowl folks coming to our state. Do we count hotel rooms? Do we count meals? Do we count gas? Do we count wear and tear on their cars? What if they brought their camper? And I realized very quickly that we would have to hire a university to do a couple of years study to figure out what the true economic impact. I mean, we could all guess, but you don't want to put your name on something you just guessed at. So I realized very quickly that that was not feasible to do that. I did introduce a bill because we do need to get it done. I do have a non-resident waterfowl bill. It's in the Senate addressing this issue. But to that is, every time we have one of these economic impact studies or whatever, do we want that bill to go through the legislature? I've been working diligently since I've been in the legislature to cut down the number of bills, and then when we start doing these bills involving wildlife. But even farther, it goes back to timeliness. What if we had, and everybody knows bird flu is causing the cost of eggs going up now, you know, and what if we had that go through our turkey population and we need to quit selling turkey permits, not today, I mean today, not next year, not after an economic impact study or any of that, or we can run a bill through the legislature. That needs to be done immediately. And there's an economic impact of not selling turkey permits of over $200,000. So I realized that. What if we had CWD, which we do have in the western part of our state, but what if we had an outbreak of that and we had to quit selling deer permits in certain sections of our state? What if we had to do that? That's not something that we can wait till we do an economic impact study on, or it's not time for the legislator to meet to allow us to do that. So with that, I realized that this bill, so I introduced it. And I'm hoping that, I don't necessarily, and I realize where Representative Corbett was coming from, because if Wildlife and Parks gets exempted, all these other agencies are going to get right in line. And I get that, and that's going to defeat the purpose of the bill. I understand that. But I do think that we could amend this bill to do some things where Wildlife and Parks would have some ability to circumvent this situation. And there's a lot of smarter people in the room than me, but I do think that we need that ability as Wildlife and Parks to react to these changes in situations a lot quicker than the time that it takes to do an impact study or a bill in the legislature. So with that, I'll stand for questions. Oh, no, I do have one other thing. I knew I was going to skip over this. I get nervous when I'm up here. In my time in politics, what I realized was, when I first came, I was always looking for the silver bullet bill. You know, I mean, we all are. The one that end all be all and you never have to deal with that again. It didn't take me very long to figure out that wasn't possible. These are living documents, and we adjust these bills year after year after year, depending on the technology changes or the different situation changes. So I don't think it's that much out of the line to ask for this bill to be modified to, I'm sure when 2648 was done, I don't think anybody thought about the impact of wildlife issues and stuff like that on it. But I don't think it's unusual to ask for changes in this bill to accommodate some of these issues that I've brought up here, and some of the other issues that a lot of smarter folks than me can think about dealing with wildlife. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. You made one comment. I wasn't sure if this was you said an economic impact study would generally cost around $200,000. Is that?
No, it's not $200,000. If it affects more than $200,000 of economic impact, then you have to do a study, and $1 million over 5 years.
Okay. My follow-up to that is, I am on rules and regs, and I mean, you were kind of leaving the impression that the economic impact part of what they have to present before rules and regs, as an example, to hit this $1 million threshold. I mean, it's really just a good faith number. I mean, the problem I know we've had in rules and regs is we'll have departments coming up and just obviously hadn't put in any thought to the financial impact. I mean, where it's very obvious, like in the case of, it would change the number of permits purchased, or it would change the number of, I can think of one, as far as how many hunters would come in. I mean, the agency, and I think it might have been Kansas Wildlife and Parks, literally had no numbers for, I mean, they had no plausible numbers for us. And so I kind of get the intent of the bill. I mean, I can see how maybe Wildlife and Parks has a couple of unique situations, but I will say, I would want to clarify for the record that, it just takes somebody with, applying some just basic math principles to come up with the economic impact, but as far as the cost of the regulation. And so I'm kind of skeptical. I just don't want to leave people the impression that this is a really hard hurdle for agencies to jump over in just prepping the information for the committee. Anyway, that's.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond? And I get what you're saying, but if you think about a true economic study, for instance, the 3-day non-resident waterfowl deal. So tell me, first of all, you just have maybe a decline in non-resident permits because they can only hunt Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. But I look at an economic study as being more, I mean, I can figure that one out, times a permit, and anybody can, but that's not what I view an economic study to be. I view an economic study to be the true economics of the hotel rooms, the meals, of the people coming to our state. So I think that's where I get into, and I'm certainly open for clarification, but that's where I get into the confusion about this is if you're going to do a true economic, it's just not the number of permits times the dollars. It's also how many meals they eat here, how many hotels they stay at, all that kind of stuff. So if I'm wrong on that, I apologize, but I think that's more what we're talking about.
Representative Wagner.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, when I've been on the committee, I mean, it's just generally you take, the Kansas tourism, has like the average out-of-state person every day they're here, they spend $148 or, whatever. I mean, usually there's just kind of a math that of some pre-existing, how much visitors spend or how much, different types of visitors spend. That's fairly readily available. But again, I don't know if that exactly, but I know it hasn't seemed to have been a real burden to get a reasonably decent number so that the committee can evaluate the rules and reg.
I think some of them are that. We just dealt with, and that committee, you dealt with the number of fire extinguishers. That's a pretty easy figure. I could even do the math on that. You got 12,000 boats registered and the fire extinguishers cost $30. Figure it out. I get that one. It's a little different if you're asking to do an economic study on non-resident waterfowl or potentially what happens if we stop selling turkey permits or deer or something like that. I think it's a little more complicated. I would love to have it simplified down to exactly what you're talking about because I think that's the whole crux of why this bill is here is because it's an economic study may be something different for you, to me, or anything. I look at it as being a pretty complex, complete deal of the actual economic impact of that law change. And I don't think the bill reads that you can only use a number of non-resident permits times that dollars or the daily rate of a non-resident visiting our state that they spend. I don't think that's what the bill says at all.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. Everything that you mentioned here doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. The department's got plenty of staff. They know whatever's happening is coming. And I think the legislature ought to kind of get out of the way and let wildlife and parks do their thing, go through rules and regs. I think we start a sad precedence here when we give one agency a get out of jail free card and they don't do their homework before they come here. I mean, this affects a lot of people in state and out of state, whatever they do. Just let them do their job, have enough lead time, and they've got some pretty sharp guys and gals over there. Just let them do their job.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that?
Absolutely.
A lot of these things I think are, Representative Corbett, I think a lot of these things are timely in the fact that how long is it going to take to do that economic study versus a population decline or a disease or something like that. I think, and I don't disagree with you, that in the perfect world, we wouldn't even be having this conversation, but in deals of disease and wildlife and stuff like that, I think it's a little bit more comprehensive to find an economic study than just adding up a bunch of numbers and sitting in a room.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This might be for Jordan again. Do we have a defined economic study, how detailed that has to be, or is that as simple as something your department puts some numbers together, or do we have something that, speaking to what you has to include, be so inclusive, or whatever what that study would have to include to make it good to present to the legislature? Do you know what?
I would refer to Jordan.
Right. There is a statute that does require economic development statement, and if you give me a second, I will find the statute.
And to answer your question, Representative, I'm not aware of any actual guideline of what you would provide in an economic study. The way I read the bill is it just says if it's an economic study of that has a value of over $200,000 a year or $1 million a year. And I would certainly welcome clarification on the criteria for that, because I supported 2640 and I still support the concept of it. I just think it doesn't apply as well as to wildlife issues as it does to other agencies that are just making rules, and you can multiply the number of people that use it by how much they're going to have to pay for that additional deal. For instance, the fire extinguisher one, that's pretty much a no-brainer. I could figure that one out myself.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it. Looks like no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for taking up so much time, but I appreciate it again. Thank you, committee.
There is a statute. It says every rule and regulation, this is 77-420, every rule and regulation proposed to be adopted by a state agency after being submitted to the Secretary of Administration and the Attorney General shall be submitted with an economic impact statement for rules and regulations as required by a different statute to contain an economic impact statement. I can send an email describing the process in more detail.
Thank you, Mike. I don't have anybody else listed as a proponent on this. Is there somebody out there that would like to testify as a proponent on this bill? Not seeing any, we'll move on. We'll move on to the opponent section of this, and first up we have Eric Stafford. Welcome to committee. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber. Do appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to 2279, and I greatly respect and admire Representative Will Carpenter and appreciate our differences of opinion on this bill. For some of the new members of the committee, I want to give a little bit of background and context on what we're talking about here. So back in 2018, we got and supported a bill passed through the legislature that required agencies to conduct an economic impact statement to determine the cost of a rule or regulation. So that was kind of the first part of what's been known as the REINS Act. The REINS Act there's an effort in Congress, but then many states have passed it. That bill was passed last year. Representative Carpenter referenced House Bill 2648 that was passed by the legislature, vetoed by Governor Kelly, and then the legislature successfully overrode the governor on that. What that bill did is required, one, it lowered the threshold, the dollar amount of the economic impact, but it also put in the provision that if a regulation has been determined or is determined through the economic impact statement process, and I'll go through that here shortly, that the cost impact to those impacted will be greater than $1 million over the first 5 years, then in order to formalize and finalize those rules and regulations, they have to pass a bill through the legislature that you guys give them the authority to do so. So the out-of-state permits that Wildlife and Parks is seeking, it's going to cost over $1 million to those impacted over the 5-year period. They would have to bring a bill to you guys to authorize that regulation, right? The purpose of the REINS Act and what we're trying to focus on and prevent is kind of a runaway executive branch where state agencies do everything through rule and reg that have a great impact on the business community and citizens of our state. That was the motivation behind the bill that passed last year. And I think Representative Corbett's comments are spot on. If we give this to Wildlife and Parks, then every other state agency, KDHE or whoever else, are going to come in and seek their own exemption. And if we want to start exempting agencies from complying with this, why did you guys choose to vote by 2/3 and override the governor on the REINS Act? Either you felt like it was good policy or you did not. The bird flu example, agencies already have emergency rule and reg authority today. If there's an issue that comes up from a bird flu or a certain type of situation that is a health-related issue, they have emergency powers to suspend rules and regulations for public health and safety. That is a non-issue, should not be an issue. It should not be made as an argument as to why this bill is necessary. Looking at, I have some documents here that from a bill hearing last year, actually on the REINS Act, I provided copies of the economic impact statement from Department of Labor. And I'll go through these so you can understand that they're really not that complicated. Part of the problem with the economic impact statement, though, and why all of this has been strengthened is because I see Representative Wassinger sitting behind me here in the room, and former chair of the Rules and Regs Committee, currently vice chair, I believe. State agencies often present incomplete economic impact statements. They don't have all of the information. These Department of Labor regulations, when they were trying to circumvent state law in the work comp arena, all of their questions, not applicable, no, none, no impact. But the questions are, brief description of the proposed rules and regulations, statement by the agency if the rules and regulations is mandated by the federal government, and a statement if approach chosen to address the policy issue is different from the one that utilized by state agencies. And then agency analysts specifically addressing the following: the extent to which the rules and regulations will enhance or restrict business activities, not applicable. The economic effect, including detailed quantification of implementation and compliance costs on specific business sectors, public utility ratepayers, individuals, local governments that would be affected by the proposed rule and regulation, none. Businesses that would be directly affected by the proposed rule and regulation, stakeholders and work comp system. So the questions are not that significant, right? They're not that hard of a hurdle for an agency to do their legitimate homework and come back with what that cost would be. So in our view, I don't think what was passed last year and what they're seeking to exempt themselves from, I don't, in our view, don't believe it's necessary, because to Representative Corbett's point, if you do it for one, you're going to have many of these bills year after year after year. So I think that concludes our testimony. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, but we would encourage that you not support this bill. Any questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Next up, I have Tanner Temple. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee, again, my name is Tanner Temple. I'm the with Americans for Prosperity. I want to share my opposition on House Bill 2279 and how it might affect our state. First of all, I just kind of want to come from a background. I'm an avid hunter, duck hunter, buck hunter, and if I'm any good at it, it's up for debate. But I saw the gentleman sitting behind us, and I do appreciate what the game wardens do for our state and how they keep us safe. So this bill in its current form exempts certain rules, including those by the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, from the legislative oversight and the ratification of proposed rules and significant economic impacts. A few points here. This bill erodes the legislative oversight. This bill creates the potential for unchecked regulatory actions, and this bill creates a precedent for future exemptions. So, as Mr. Stafford said earlier, it is our position that this would push it outside of the REINS Act and make a future precedent for other agencies to try the same. This exemption is concerning because of all the state agencies. The bill weakens the REINS Act, which ensures our elected representatives have the final say on the costly regulations. Without this oversight, the Department of Wildlife and Park could create rules that impose high costs on businesses, local governments, and individuals, potentially harming their operation and livelihoods. Additionally, allowing this exemption sets a dangerous precedent, weakening protections against excessive government overreach. But for these reasons, we urge the committee to oppose this bill in its current form. So, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, any questions? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Temple, I know you work for AFP and you guys work nationally. I'm wondering, I know a number of states have passed the REINS Act in the last couple of years. Have you seen this effort in other states as far as trying to exempt agencies? I mean, is this something that has happened to other states that have passed the REINS Act?
Not to the top of mind, but I mean, if we do start doing these exemptions, we can see other state agencies in other states try to make this further impact against the REINS Act. So I think it's a slippery slope we start to slide down.
Not seeing any other. Thank you. Was anyone else here to speak on this topic? Representative Wassinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague who alerted me that this was going on. I respect my colleague, and I totally disagree with what he's talking about. Let me give you a perfect example, and anyone who is on rules and regs should remember this. And by the way, in odd years, I am the chair. I'm a little odd, so they make me the chair on the odd years, and then the Senate is the chair on the even years. Let me give you a perfect example of what Wildlife and Parks did. A while back, they decided that due to instances of deer wasting, other things, they decided that they wanted to cancel the deer season. And I said, there's zero economic impact on this. Oh, there's no way we can figure that out. And I said, well, can you tell me how many licenses you won't get? License fees you won't get? Oh, we figure, and then he gave me that number. And I said, do you think any of the hunting lodges would suffer on this? You could call one and ask one, how much do you think they would lose? And then multiply the rest of the hunting lodges. Know that number. You could call tourism and travel. At the time, they're in your building. They have many ways of estimating how much a town will get, whether it's hunting season, basketball season, wrestling season. You're talking about hotels, restaurants, gas stations, hunting lodges, licenses. And I said, we are not asking for an exact number, but you can get lots of estimates for that. There is nowhere that says you have to have it absolutely perfect, and if it's not, then we're going to be mad at you. But I knew for a fact that there was not a zero impact on wildlife and parks on that. They don't want to do the work. They think it's too much. Well, we'd have to hire someone else. Isn't that something that we hear from every agency? Oh, well, if I do this, we're going to have at least 2 more FTEs. No. It's called making phone calls. It's called checking what you know for sure will be impacted. I completely oppose this bill. There is no reason for them to be exempted. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for being here in committee. Of course, I'm a member of the committee as well, and I very much remember that. I'm glad you brought up that example. I do want to highlight to the committee, and it is KSA 77416 that gives the details. And again, it's not an economic impact study. It's just an economic impact statement that is required. It's frankly very well laid out in statute. And much like the chairwoman has testified, I'll totally agree that the problem is agencies, they don't even give a good faith effort. And to do a good faith effort with this is not a hard thing to do. And it doesn't require outside consultants or anything like that. It's just a couple of basic, the obvious impacts that the bill is going to have on different businesses and such, and just doing a good faith effort. Again, but the KSA 77416, lays it out. I think it's very reasonable, and I certainly agree with your testimony. So thank you.
Committee, any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was there anyone else wishing to speak on this bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Randy Stu again. We did submit written opponent testimony, and I don't want to stand up here and beat a dead horse. I think everything's already been said, but I do want to draw the committee's attention to our written testimony on behalf of the Kansas Grain and Feed Association, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, opponent testimony to this proposed softening of the REINS Act. We, as a highly regulated industry in the state of Kansas, we certainly supported the bills in the last that Eric Stafford spoke to, specifically the bill last year that strengthened the economic impact statement requirements. And we see this as softening those requirements, and not necessarily specifically to the Department of Wildlife and Parks, but it's clear what this would do would open that floodgate for the other agencies that would directly then impact our industry. So for that reason, we just want to draw your attention to our written opponent testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Last call. All right, we're going to move on to the next item and close this one up. Next up, we're going to talk about HB 2372. Mike, will you fill us in there?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2372 would abolish an entity, the fallen firefighters, dealing with fallen firefighters memorial. What it would do is establish a new entity, the Kansas Firefighters Memorial Advisory Committee, The membership is in new section 2. I think it's the same as the current law. The peanut of the bill, I think, appears on page 2 in section 3. Current law provides that the memorial for fallen firefighters would be within the state capitol plaza, and the bill provides the fallen firefighter memorial would be located at the Kansas Firefighters Museum in Wichita. If you have questions, I'll try and answer them.
Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there something that would prevent 2 memorials?
I think you need authorization for 2. Current law provides that the memorial would be on the Capitol grounds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mike. I have several opponents written down here, proponents that would, in written, and I have some neutral with Ted Bush with the firefighters. I have Mark, our state fire marshal, also Mike Holheisel from the Wichita City Council. All have put in written. Is there anybody that wanted to speak on this bill?
Chairman, thank you. I won't take much of your time. My name is Mark Engholm. I'm the State Fire Marshal. Just wanted to give a little bit of neutral testimony on this and just let you know within the fire service itself, I've heard no objections to this bill whatsoever. The one thing that I would ask you, and I've given it in my written testimony that you should have in front of you is just, I think we need to hit the simple button on this. Just some quick history is in 2001, the fire service came together to the state legislature and said, this is prior 9/11, by the way, pre-9/11-01, but wanted to put a memorial on the State House grounds very similar to the law enforcement memorial, where the names of fallen firefighters could be put on there each year and in remembrance of them. That there was a committee formed, it was the governor appointed people, there was a fund, everything else. I've only been in this office for a year, but when I came into this office, I found that that group was not meeting. They had not met for several years. They had, there had been over 20 years. As far as they had got was to do some artwork on the design. And it's unfortunate. It really is. In the meantime, the city of Wichita in 2002, and working with the Kansas Firefighters Museum, established a memorial there that does the same things that we wanted on the State House grounds. And it's there, it's functional, they have a great location for it, and I've not heard any objection, like I said, from the fire service to doing this. The only thing I would ask was, a lot of the rules and regulations and oversight of this was because it was going to be on the State House grounds. I would just basically ask the bill be made very simple, and it should just be very, that we recognize that as the state memorial and that we allow the fire service organizations to take it from there without having people appointed to the board by the governor and state oversight and the Secretary of Administration involved and the facilities management director and the Historical Society. So that's all I wanted to bring to you. And I'll happily stand for questions.
Committee, are there any questions? Not seeing any. I appreciate you coming up here today. I went down there Saturday. Kind of ashamed. I lived in Wichita my entire life, and I've never been inside of that fire station before. The History Museum or the Firefighters Museum. It is something really neat history. I saw the memorial. They go back as far as like 1890 or 1904 or something like that. It goes way back, and they've done a lot of homework to vet all these names out, and unfortunately the wall is getting full, and it's a pretty big wall. Anyway, I'm glad for your testimony today.
Yeah, thank you.
I see we do have, like I said, we do have several written testimonies on this one. some of our scheduling, some of the quickness and lack of scheduling that kind of happened. We kind of, some people weren't able to make it, but they did want to provide some written testimony, which is available. Anyone else on this? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4. Item number 4 is going to be HB 2378. Mike?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2378 establishes the Removal of Squatters Act. Section 1 of the bill provides the finding by the legislature that the fundamental right of owning property includes the right of the owner to exclude others from entering and remaining unlawfully on the property. It further finds that squatting or the unauthorized entrance and remaining is a violation of property rights and against the public interest. And it's the intent of this act to ensure that squatting is considered a crime, to adequately protect rights and so on. Section 2 provides that the owner of a dwelling unit or agent of the owner may request the removal of an unauthorized person from a dwelling unit by submitting a affidavit to the county sheriff in the county where the dwelling unit is located. The affidavit, there's 6 different items that have to be a part of that affidavit. There's a definition of dwelling unit and tenant, which refers to definitions in the Landlord-Tenant Act. The Section 3 provides that the county sheriff shall verify that the affidavit, the person that files the affidavit is in fact the owner or an agent, and upon verification, they have to wait at least 24 hours from the receipt of the affidavit, and then the sheriff shall serve notice on the unauthorized person to vacate the property immediately. The service is either by hand delivery or by posting notice on the property itself. The county sheriff may arrest any person found in the dwelling for trespass, burglary, or any other offense if they have an arrest warrant. For the person, the sheriff can charge a fee of not more than $50 to process the affidavit. The owner of the dwelling unit has to provide notice before they file this affidavit with the sheriff to basically tell the person or persons in the dwelling unit they have to vacate immediately. And a copy of that notice has to be affixed to the affidavit and so on. Section 5 provides that the county sheriff nor any political subdivision would be held liable for any damages. Section 6 provides that a person may bring a civil cause of action for wrongful removal and so forth. So the current law, I think they would have to go through the Landlord-Tenant Act, and it would require considerably more time, or they would have to bring an action under the Code of Civil Procedure, which is separate. So if you have questions, I'll try and answer them.
Committee, any questions? Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know if other states have similar legislation?
This bill was patterned after a law in Alabama, and I don't know how many states have it. We can try and find out if you want.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the information. I see under section 7, there's a definition of squatter. Is there a timeline or time period in which one is or is not a squatter?
No.
Representative Lewis?
Yeah, I'd just like you to review one more time for us what has to happen before the sheriff can remove the squatter procedurally.
This, it's intended to be an expedited process to get rid of someone that in a dwelling unit that has no authority or that is not a tenant and so on. It doesn't include a holdover tenant. So it's somebody that's occupying property that has no legal right to be there and so forth. So the idea is that the owner would sign or fill out this affidavit. It probably, we need to add the word notarized affidavit in there. Basically, the owner of the dwelling unit or their agent is swearing that this person is unauthorized to be there. They've remained unlawfully. That the person is not a tenant or a holdover tenant, so they have no relationship in the past or currently with the owner of the property and so on. So, and the unauthorized person is not an immediate family member of the property owner, which that's, I guess, to cover a son or a daughter or somebody that decides they're going to, anyway.
There's more than that. I mean, just an affidavit is going to cause the sheriff to do.
It's a sworn statement, basically.
Right, I get
what
that.
I say is true, and that this person is in the dwelling unit and has no authority to be there, and I want to have them evicted.
But then there's notice provisions and other
There's
other
notice by
procedures.
both the person that signs the affidavit before they turn the affidavit over to the sheriff. They have to notify the person that's in the dwelling unit, so they get double notice. Once the affidavit goes to the sheriff, then the sheriff has to either personally serve or post the notice on the property and so on, and they're told to vacate. If they don't, then the sheriff can arrest them for trespass or whatever if there's another crime that the person has committed, if there's an arrest warrant.
Thank you.
Representative Howell?
Thank you, Chair. So my question is the phrase holdover tenant used in Kansas statute currently?
This bill would be separate and apart from the current Landlord-Tenant Act. And there is a process in the Landlord-Tenant Act for evicting someone for non-payment of rent or being a holdover where they no longer have the authority to live there. So this is a separate proceeding.
Okay, and then a follow-up question, if I may. And then my same question about definition of immediate family member. Would that also be basically the same answer?
There is no definition in the bill. I think there is a definition in Kansas law about immediate family member. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but I can find it for you.
Representative James?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, why do we even need this bill? And maybe that's for the proponent if there is one. But I mean, it says in Section 3 that the county sheriff, line 12, may arrest a person found in the dwelling for trespassing, burglary, theft, or any criminal act. They've already got that authority anyway. So why would we need this bill?
Well, I will let the proponent speak to it. Again, that's maybe superfluous language about giving the sheriff the authority to do what they already can do, but there is no expedited process to get rid of someone that's in a dwelling unit that is not authorized, and it can take somewhere between probably 45 and 60 days to get somebody out or more, and this bill would probably, I don't know, I mean, couple of weeks at the most.
Not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Mike. Oh, sorry, we do have one. Representative Myers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, a little late to the game. Is there anything in this, I was trying to read through the bill, is there anything in this that requires that the sheriff verify whether the person has a lease or not?
Well, the sheriff is required to notify or find out that the person that swears the affidavit is in fact the owner and is, and that they, basically what the person is doing is they're swearing, and if you add notarized in there, it will be a crime of perjury if they falsely claim somebody has no right. But there's no requirement that the sheriff investigate whether or not the person has some type of a lease. When they go and they are trying to evict the person, I assume the person would say, hey, I've got a lease.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you, Mike. First up for the trifecta, Chairman Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, I promise I will never do this again. Testify on 3 bills. So last year I introduced the squatters bill. It was on the news last year, as all of us saw. Georgia was probably front and center, Atlanta, Georgia, where people were just moving into these vacant houses. And so I introduced this bill, and I'm not a realtor or involved in any of that kind of stuff, so I got immediate pushback. So I thought I need to get with the experts. And since that time, Georgia was first, Florida's passed one, Louisiana's passed one, Alabama's passed one. Because these are folks that just move into vacant houses and you can't get them out. The current rate, if you go through the legal process, you've got to first get a district court hearing and all that kind of stuff, and then you've got to get a judge to tell them they have X amount of time to get out. It can take months, and actually I'm in the middle of one right now that's been going on for 3 months. So it does happen. This is an expedited way of getting people that have no legal right to be in that house whatsoever. They've just driven by it or saw it was vacant or whatever and decided to move in. So there's a lot of folks behind me, experts in this field, but that's the impetus of this bill is why we came to this, and this is what it addresses. I'm not sure it's needed in Kansas today, but I think that in the future it will. It's a preemptive bill. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Representative Smo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Representative Carpenter, all 3 times. I appreciate seeing you back in this room at this time of day. As far as this bill, this only includes dwellings. This does not go into if somebody moved into a building that is not scheduled for like residential.
As far as I'm concerned, right, correct.
Okay, I was just making sure.
Residential.
I do know that they've seen some of those issues in other states as well, so I was just making sure that I had the wording correct.
As far as I know, it's just residential.
All right, thank you so much.
Not seeing any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, committee.
Next up, I have Mark Toom. Welcome to committee.
All right. Chairman Kessler, members of the House Federal and State Affairs Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of HB 2378. My name is Mark Toom, the Vice President of Governmental Affairs with the Kansas Association of Realtors. And we, like also, I think, Chairman Carpenter, heard a lot from our members and also the public, and I'm sure you probably did with recent stories. And a lot of those are stories from the coast or other jurisdictions where it is easier to establish possession of a property by squatting. Very often in Kansas, we consider those people trespassers and remove them. But we wanted to come up with a process that was outside of the Landlord-Tenant Act, because I think that you'll get into a lot more complicated situations. This is for truly an expedited process for people who have no legal entanglement with a property, and wanted to provide a way to get them out in weeks rather than months, and also provide some safeguards. If they are lying on that affidavit, there are consequences for that. But really trying to make this more of a law enforcement rather than going through the eviction process, which can be a process that is well known to people who do this in a repetitive manner, and they can kind of game the system. This would be a system to really expedite that process and remove somebody much quicker. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you very much for your support.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you know why immediate family members are exempt from this?
This is largely based on the language that was in Alabama's law, which came after those previous. I think this provision is in all of those. I think it's another complication. I think when you have a family member that might have a connection to a property, you're going to get into a much more in-depth court proceeding that it's not as easy to handle, and it probably needs an attention of a judge rather than a more of an expedited process that we're providing for here.
Thank you.
So in other words, something like a family member, I mean, they might have a somewhat of a right to be there. So that needs to go through the whole different process of
They may have gone out there
eviction.
welcome, but maybe, they have a legal right that could be at least argued in a court. So we stayed away from that.
Yeah, that would need to go through an eviction process, not an expedited where they have absolutely no authority to be in this property.
Correct.
Body, any other questions? Representative Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. So I wanted to know, and this may be more appropriate for the previous conferee, but how does this affect individuals who may not be on the lease, but are living within the dwelling? So would this bill allow for an individual to say their partner that they're with or something who is not on the lease it is squatting, and so they would have to be removed from the property using this process? Is there anything that would protect them? I'm thinking of people, experiencing intimate partner violence, or who may be going through a really nasty breakup, or just anything of that nature, even like a friend who they had staying with them who's not necessarily on the lease.
If there's a lease in place, this is not going to be the one that's probably going to be used to remove people from. If there's somebody with a legal right to be in that space, and this is really for, I think the court, in a case of a domestic violence, the court could probably take a look at that situation, but this is meant for when they have no legal right to be there, and there's no lease in place. So
like, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, is it okay if I clarify? Thank you. So like if a person, so the owner has a lease with an individual, but another individual is living in the property who is not on the lease, that other individual who is not on the lease would not be eligible to be thrown out under this?
I don't think that would be the situation that this is intended to address, because in that situation, you have somebody with a legal tenant or a landlord-tenant relationship, and that's somebody that they've maybe subleased with, or in their situation, but that there is somebody there with a legal right to be there. So I don't see the sheriff removing anybody in that situation under this law.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still don't understand why this bill is needed. And I show houses as well throughout Kansas City and Missouri, and I've come across people that weren't supposed to be there. It's easy to tell them to leave, and it's call the listing agent and let them know that they've got in somehow, and they take care of it. So I don't understand why we need this bill when the sheriff already has the ability to give them citations or arrest them. It just seems like a waste.
We've heard of some situations where there's still process that takes a lot of time. And I think that that's what this bill is intended to clear up, is to shorten that process. I agree that in most situations we do call them trespassers, and that the horror stories that you see on different cable news programs are not something that there's going to be easily happening here in Kansas, but I don't want that to happen here in Kansas, and I think that we can find a way. This bill provides a shortened way to get them out.
Representative Sanders?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to get extra clarification, I guess, for what the previous representative was talking about. I had a situation one time, well, it didn't involve me personally, but a friend of mine, he and a woman had been living together for a while, and then they broke up, and she wouldn't leave. And I said, well, why don't you just call the sheriff and have them remove her? And the sheriff said, there's nothing we can do about it. And she just would not leave. And finally, after several months, she left. So would this expedite that situation?
That is again a situation where somebody is going to be governed by the landlord tenant and they would need to be evicted. There is a writ of restitution that can be occurred in those situations. They would probably need to seek some legal advice because there are certainly ways to remove somebody from that situation.
But this bill wouldn't help
This bill
that?
is not that solution.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Mosley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To echo what my Marine Corps brother from across me just asked, this bill seems like it is a solution looking for a problem. So it also, like there's like, and the language kind of feels a little broad in some spaces. And so I guess ultimately my question is, what are you seeing the beginnings of widespread issues that makes you feel like in Kansas that makes you feel like this bill is necessary for us to put it on the books? Because we just recently talked about a bill that seems like there's cleanup for something previously that happened that wasn't really fully thought through or fully fleshed out. And so what is going to stop us from being in that place again next year, trying to fix something that kind of was a solution looking for a problem?
Well, I think that we are seeing an increasing number of people who are in property that they have no legal right to be in. And right now, our law enforcement and our courts are handling those largely appropriately, but it takes time. There is a lot of process involved when you go through the eviction process and then eventually get to that writ of restitution. So there's a significant amount of process that's involved, and this is designed to shorten that process to where people are not going to be motivated, because I think we don't want to encourage people, because I think that very often in these situations you see people who are repeat offenders, and they figure out the system and they keep I think abusing the system and some of the process, and this is designed to be a much shorter process to avoid some of those conditions.
What are some of the, Mr. Chairman, what are some of the safeguards in this bill to prevent it from abusing like making sure that both parties are protected in this process? Because I wouldn't want someone in a property that I have to just be in there. But also I know that like the person who is the landlord has outsized power. They have the power of the courts. And what is going to prevent this bill from being abusive in the other direction?
There is a provision here providing penalties for filing a false affidavit. So if there is a situation that it is one of those maybe more complicated, a family member, or there was a lease and there's a holdover, and that they can demonstrate that, then that would be a false filing of an affidavit, and that'd be a misdemeanor under the law.
So during a housing crisis where someone is also vulnerable, like there'll be a fine, because fine just generally means that is legal if you can afford it. So there'll be a fine, but then someone's been like pushed out of their housing situation already.
This would be a situation where they don't have a lease. They're not in this legally. So I have very little sympathy, I guess, for somebody that's in a house that has no legal right to be there.
I understand. Thank you.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I know in my district and in Sedgwick County, which represents 1/6 of the population of the state of Kansas, I have been hearing a lot of requests and concern about wanting to have clarification and tightening up of some of the squatter laws in the state of Kansas, and that there are some issues with our laws that could be improved. And I know some of my constituents in particular are concerned about us making sure, as legislators, making sure that we do not have any possibilities of issues that we are seeing in other states happening here in the state of Kansas. And I think that that is a worthy concern for us to make sure that that is true. And I'm just wondering, as an organization, is that something that you guys are hearing? And if you're hearing from any cities that are struggling, as I've been hearing.
Yeah, no, I think we're always looking for solutions, and I think that in this particular one that came to us from some of our colleagues in other states, and it's been on the books for a year, and it seems to be working as intended. So I think we can learn from other states. We should do that.
Mark, not seeing anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On WebEx, we have Sheriff Easter from Sedgwick. Are you there?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I appreciate you giving me the time. I'm Jeff Easter, representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association. As you see, we've come in neutral. I think that there is possibly the need for a squatter bill as such, but we believe that there is several cleanup items in this bill if it were to pass through. First off, there absolutely needs to be the affidavit notarized. This gives us the opportunity that if someone falsifies an affidavit, they can be charged with a crime for doing so. We also believe that immediate family member needs to be clarified in this bill. We deal with a lot of civil issues currently that deal with this kind of issue of immediate family. I agree with the gentleman that testified that immediate family generally goes through the court process with a judge and a hearing because it can become very complicated. The second thing or third thing we suggest is maybe adding criminal damage to property, we understand, or any other criminal act, but this will be a common crime we find in these cases. And we find it quite often when landlords have evicted, and you will find it in this particular instance as well. We also believe that if you keep the language as such that it's just sheriffs, then we need to clarify the language on page 2, line 26. It's sheriff's offices, we're not departments. And then also the term sheriff's officer, which is sheriff's deputy. However, we would offer the change that it should be any law enforcement officer. If you're going to stay with not going through a judge for this process, and it's simply filling out an affidavit, notarizing it, and presenting it to a law enforcement agency, we all have the ability to determine who is the rightful owner of that residence and who is supposed to be there. So we would highly suggest that you change that to all law enforcement. We also believe that the language should change on page 2, line 26, be changed to no county sheriff or their deputies or employees. That would also change to law enforcement if you so choose to change that language to law enforcement. This is because the way this works is the lawsuit is filed against the sheriff and the individual deputies or employees of the sheriff's office. We also think this committee should really take a hard look if there should be any judicial review of this. We're not saying without an absolute that there should be, but in most of these types of cases, there is judicial review. To answer a couple of the representatives' questions on if someone is in what is considered to be a civil union, because you've allowed somebody to stay, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, a friend of the family, those type of things, that is absolutely a civil matter. If you have taken or have made the choice to allow somebody to stay with you, there is nothing law enforcement can do about that. And there's laws in place in the state of Kansas that cover that. That's why law enforcement will tell you we can't remove them. So then at that point, that particular person that allowed them to stay with them, whether it's a lease agreement or a home ownership, has to go through the eviction process, which is through a judge. And then if a judge authorizes the eviction, then we serve the eviction. The other thing that I would say is if you involve the judicial process on this, then it does need to stay with the sheriff's office because we're the only ones authorized by law to serve eviction notices. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Committee, questions? Representative Lewis?
Thank you, Sheriff East. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sheriff Easter, for giving us your views on this. I have a question about the idea of having a judicial review before the squatters are removed. It would be, I take it would be similar to your getting an arrest or a search warrant. Is that your idea of what it would entail?
Well, I agree with the previous conferee that the eviction can take quite some time. And this quickens that aspect. The problem is that if there is some type of dispute over the lease or some type of dispute that they're supposed to be there, that's why you have judicial review. And to say that this is simply for folks that are not supposed to be there and that have just moved in, which all of us agree, I would think we agree that we don't want that happening. This would quicken that process. The problem is those caveats that could occur. And then we're embroiled in removing somebody that might have a stake in that home. And that's why we just suggest that there's discussion about judicial review on this. Again, the hamper to that is that it does take a lot longer.
If I might. So I was thinking more of an ex parte procedure where, you wouldn't be bringing the other party into it, but you would have a judge review the affidavit and bless it. And similar to you present arrest warrant affidavits and search warrant affidavits without any review by the target. And I'm just wondering how long that process takes or would take.
That's an idea that could be quicker. You take a look at PFAs or protection from abuse orders and protection from stalking orders. That is an affidavit written up by the person requesting the PFA. Those are done fairly quickly, and we serve those usually within 48 hours of receiving the court order from a judge. And so that could be a possibility. What I will tell you is currently, if we run into it every once in a while, mainly with vacant homes that folks have set up residents in there, mainly homeless folks. When we respond to those, we will have the homeowner fill out a trespass affidavit, and then they are trespassed and forced to leave. If they come back, they can be arrested. If it's a deal where folks have broken in, staying there, but things are missing from the residence, then we arrest them for burglary. So we have the opportunity to do some of this right now.
Thank you.
Representative Sanders?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This happens to me from time to time up here. There are people who appear as a neutral testimony, but it seems to me like you're not neutral, you're in opposition to this, and maybe you accept the concept of this, but don't think that this is the vehicle, because it seems to me you're bringing up some very, very good points, and this needs a lot of work. Would that be accurate?
We agree with the concept of it. There's no doubt about it, because if as other people have testified, if you see in other states, some of the things that they've had to deal with is absolutely against the homeowner. So we agree with the concept. We just think that there is some things that need to be cleaned up in this bill for us to be supportive.
But it would take multiple amendments for that to happen, correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Not seen any more. Sheriff, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you for your time.
Was there, we do have some written testimony for this as well. Is there anybody else that was wanting to speak on this that I did not give a chance to? Not seeing any. We're going to close this one up. And Body, that wraps us up for today. Thank you for hanging in there today. I appreciate it, guys. And we are adjourned.